Hey, everybody, welcome back to the podcast. You're listening to the longest running superhero role playing game on Earth. I'm your host, and normally I'd say I was the game master, but not for this one. One of our players took a turn as GM this time, which reminds me on my podcast, I've always tried to give credit where credit was due, but over the last few months, I uploaded some videos where I shared information that certain players were sort of embarrassed by. I guess when it's a small group of close friends sitting in my living room playing a game on a Saturday afternoon, they tend to cut loose or say things that normally they wouldn't say. So, me having a podcast where I kind of tell everybody everything made some of the players uncomfortable. So, I'm going to try to stop mentioning people by name. And since this game had some adult moments in it, I won't say who ran it. Speaking of the game itself, before we get into it, smash that like button, make sure you're subscribed, ring the bell, and leave us a comment. We've got a great community here, and it's all thanks to you guys. Thank you so much for being here. So, with all that said, let's dive in. The prologue to this one takes place on Halloween of 1972. Like I say, I was a player rather than the GM, and I was playing John Redbridge, or more specifically, one of many Red Bridges. At the end of World War II, there was a mishap with a duplicator ray, so there are a bunch of John Redbridges in our game world. And while they started with the same personality, they have lived different lives and had different experiences, and now they're all their own man. And one challenge with that is each one tries to come up with his own unique superhero name that none of the others are using. And one thing that has always been a consistent with the character, despite all these variants, is that he tends to wear red. And as such, they adopt names like the Crimson Crusader or the Scarlet Centurion, that sort of thing. And by 1972, a lot of the good names are already taken. So this particular John Redbridge hasn't thought up a superhero moniker yet, nor has he come up with a costume either. He's on a rooftop in New York City wearing a red t-shirt and a domino mask, sort of like the one Robin wears, and he's carrying a baseball bat and beating up generic thugs. And while doing this, he encounters a female superhero who's 24 years old and has black hair. And just like the theme of his character is the color red, the theme of her character is the color purple. So she has a purple costume, purple lipstick, purple earrings, purple eyeshadow, etc. So they both beat up bad guys until the thugs are all knocked out. And of course, as we've said so many times in previous videos, John Redbridge has the Valentino effect. So she's interested in him, but she has kind of an Aubrey Plaza vibe. So she just says, hey, he's always well aware of how the Valentino effect works. So that lets him know exactly what she means when she says, hey. So he tries to be a gentleman and he tells her she did a good job, then asks what her name is. But she hasn't thought up a name yet either. He spends a short while brainstorming up names like the Purple Paladin and stuff like that, but she hates all of his ideas. He says if he doesn't know her name, he won't know who to ask for when he dials her phone number later. That makes her blush, and she tucks her hair behind one of her ears, which he understands is a sign that he's doing well. So he says, why don't we go hang these guys from their ankles from a light pole by the police station, then go grab a bite to eat? So they do. And they go to an Italian restaurant, which is kind of a running gag in our game. This particular GM must have a thing for Italian restaurants or something, because anytime you ask any NPC what they're in the mood to eat, they always say Italian. We also established that this Red Bridge saved the life of this restaurant's owner from some mafia types. So, as a thank you, they let him and his new lady friend in, despite the fact they're wearing masks and he's got a bloody baseball bat and so on and so forth. This restaurant, by the way, is also based on a pizza place where I used to live, where they would seat people close to the front of the restaurant normally. but they had back rooms for like weddings and banquets and stuff like that. So they seat the superheroes in this thing that's kind of like an overflow room. And there was a wedding reception there not too long before, and there's still decorations up. And most versions of John Redbridge like the idea of getting married, having kids, settling down, etc. So that's the direction the conversation moves in. But she says her dad walked out on her and her mom when she was young. And in 1972, the big divorce boom was happening. So she's not so sure she wants a commitment because she thinks she'll just end up abandoned again. And he is aware that this is also the era of the sexual revolution, and that if she's interested in him but doesn't want a commitment, then it means she wants to hook up, right? So he sort of teases slash flirts with her by asking if she's a supervillain. She asks why he would even think that, and he says, in his experience, people who wear purple are almost always secretly evil. She says that's dumb, but then he starts naming off people like the Joker and stuff who wear purple. He also says he's suspicious of people who wear green. She mentions Green Lantern and the Incredible Hulk. And he says that the green thing is kind of a crapshoot. You've got like a 50-50 chance with those guys. But people who wear purple are almost always bad. And she laughs and says, well, I guess I'm a bad girl then. So with that, they head back to his place. And I won't get into the details, of course. I will just say that this particular Redbridge has an apartment here in town. It used to be a factory that manufactured railroad supplies during World War II, but it's been shut down for years. So the downstairs is very industrial. But the second floor is something that he's turned into one of those big apartments you'd see in 80s movies. And he has a variety of old-timey stuff up here, like a jukebox. So he plays romantic music, and one thing leads to another, and we'll just leave it at that. The next morning, they wake up and they're both happy. He asks if he can make her breakfast, and on his end, he feels like this constitutes a relationship now because he's an old-fashioned guy. And I mean, he's an immortal, so he's a very old-fashioned guy, you know what I mean? Anyways, she gets uncomfortable and decides to leave. So he's sort of out in the cold, and he feels icky inside and is trying to figure out what he did wrong. And when he has to do things like wash wine glasses from the night before, it just sort of drives the point home for him. Meanwhile, she goes home, takes a shower, and is upset because wasn't looking for anything at all. And she doesn't usually act like that. So she calls her mom and tells her the whole story, and her mom can relate and says she had a story like that once too. And sometimes she wonders if he was the one that got away. But she comes back from her thoughts of yesteryear and says it's a good thing she married the guy that she did because otherwise her kids wouldn't exist. And her kids are everything to her. But so nonetheless, she cautions her daughter to not pass up a good opportunity. So the next night, John Redbridge is out on rooftops with a ball bat again when along comes the purple girl. And this night ends up being an almost exact repeat of the night before. So again, they wake up the following morning, and again, he offers to make breakfast. And he figures out that she has intimacy issues because of her dad going out for what is basically metaphorical cigarettes, right? And never coming home. So Redbridge tells her how he was created by the old ones to fight in this big space war. Then the old ones just left, and the enemies they were fighting went into hibernation. And the whole point of him even existing was just gone. She asks him what he did, and he basically says he took it one day at a time. He gives her the French toast he made for her, and she says she has to go. He doesn't understand what she's running away from, and what she's really running away from is connection. They've both been abandoned, and she doesn't want to get close to anyone because then she worries that he will leave her, and she hates that more than anything. So for a couple nights, she watches him through binoculars as he does his nightly vigilante thing on the rooftops of New York City. But she keeps her distance, physically and emotionally. She watches him for a while, and he is clearly sad. One day, her mom calls her and tells her that her younger brother is in the hospital. He got jumped by some guys, and at first she's worried she stirred up some sort of criminal equivalent of a hornet's nest. But as it turns out, she didn't. So she sits in the waiting room as her little brother goes in for surgery. And she looks around at all these people who are there for each other, holding hands. And it's people to celebrate with when the doctors have good news, and it's a shoulder to cry on when it's not good news. So thankfully, her brother is fine. And that night, she goes after the guys who hurt him. They pull guns on her, and she uses glowing purple force manipulation, sort of like what Star Sapphire uses. And she puts a field around the gun that the bullets can't pass through. But while she's paying attention to the guys in front of her, a thug behind her hits her over the head with his gun. And just when things look really bad, Redbridge smacks the attacker upside the head with a ball bat. The heroes beat up the bad guys together, and once the fighting is over with, he starts to say that he's sorry if he said or did something that scared her off. And she kisses him and said, it wasn't you, it was me. And they end up back at his place again. But this time, she doesn't leave. She makes him breakfast and asks him if he has any plans for Thanksgiving. He doesn't, so she invites him over to her family's house. So Thanksgiving rolls around, and they roll into the driveway in his red 1960s muscle car. And they walk into the house holding hands, and the house smells wonderful, like cinnamon and pumpkin pie and all sorts of things. As she goes to help her mom in the kitchen, her two brothers greet John, and one of them is also named John. But since his middle name is Jackson, he just goes by Jack. As they are talking, Redbridge looks over and he sees a black and white photograph of one of his ex-girlfriends, and he's confused. For a second, he wonders if somehow he's walked into a trap. He remembers the jokes that he made at the Italian restaurant about whether or not she was secretly a supervillain. And before he can put two and two together, the girls walk into the living room from the kitchen, and Violet introduces her mother, Helen Parr, aka Elastigirl. Helen is shocked. Redbridge is shocked. Elastigirl asks if this is a joke. Violet is confused. Helen's temper comes out, and she asks John Redbridge if he's sleeping with her daughter. Violet asks what's going on. Dash shows up with bandages on. He's the one who had surgery before. And the injuries that he received from those thugs is when he was on patrol. At any rate, John says, "I'm so sorry, Helen. I had no idea." And with that, Elastigirl starts attacking him physically. She stretches over and she punches him, and she screams and she cries. And their youngest, Jack, teleports Redbridge out into the driveway using Omnipower. Helen goes to her room and shuts the door. Violet goes after her, asking what is even going on. And Helen says, "You remember the guy that she mentioned on the phone, the fish who got away?" And Violet realizes what's going on. John Redbridge is immortal. He was a hero during World War II. Her mom was a hero during World War II. Violet says, "Oh my God." And just like that, Thanksgiving is ruined. Dash runs out and grabs Chinese food for everybody. And eventually the girls come out, and Jack mentions that he read Redbridge's mind using his omnipower, and he tells them that Redbridge was surprised. That's the comment that makes all the difference. And it takes time for it to outweigh all of the emotions that are flying around, but eventually it does. Helen is the last to calm down, but she's a superhero. And in her 48 years on this planet, she's experienced all manner of strangeness. So after the shock passes, she starts to be able to wrap her head around this. And more time goes by, and the Christmas shopping season starts, and criminals are doing their shopping at night while the stores are closed. So once again, it's ball bat time. And once again, Violet lends a hand. Afterwards, she and Red talk, and he explains everything. She comments on how messed up this is, and he says he's confused by several parts of this whole thing. But one thing that he doesn't get is that Violet says her father abandoned her. Redbridge knew Mr. Incredible, and he didn't seem like the kind of person to abandon his family. Violet just coldly says, "Well, he did." And Redbridge comments that an awful lot of superheroes went missing around that same time, which is something Violet did not know about. So the next day, Violet tells her mother, Dash, and Jack this, and she asks her mom if she kept anything of Dad's that might give them some sort of a clue. Helen says she saw an attractive younger woman with beautiful caramel colored skin and long silvery white hair meeting with Mr. Incredible. And she overheard a phone call between the two of them one time. So when he never came home, Helen assumed it was an affair, got angry, and threw out all of Bob's property. But Dash admits he saved what he could and put it in the treehouse out back. So Jack goes up into the treehouse because now Jack is about the age Dash was, before, roughly. And in the treehouse are a bunch of newspaper clippings of Mr. Incredible saving various people and stuff like that. There's old trophies, there's a key to the city. And among all of the mementos is something akin to an iPad, but it self-destructed after Bob read it. And it's been in a treehouse for 10 years, right? It's exposed to the elements. So it's in rough shape. Thankfully, Jack's omnipower can do just about anything. So he casts regeneration usable on others, and it repairs everything that's wrong with this device. So the family plays back the last message that was for Mr. Incredible, and they learned that Mirage was not his lover. She was a business contact, and it was a job fighting robots. But what Mr. Incredible didn't know was he was actually helping train the robots to kill the supers. And since so many supers died on that island, the Incredibles decide they need all the help they can get. So they take Redbridge with them. Helen calls in a favor from yet another old boyfriend, and she borrows a plane. They fly to the island where they then get shot down. So Violet puts a force globe around them and flies them the rest of the way. Once they get to the island, it's time for violence. The supers take out Syndrome's guards and battle their way to Syndrome's inner sanctum, where they find his trophy room. And here they behold a grisly sight. In one glass case rests the final uniform of Mr. Incredible: red tights with black trunks and the yellow eye logo on the chest. And in the case next to it is the rest of Mr. Incredible. So the Parr family is obviously very upset by this. But before they can do much of anything, Syndrome hits them with a 0-point energy beam, holding them in place. Even Redbridge can't flex a muscle, since 0-point energy is basically infinite energy at a microscopic scale all around us all the time. So a contest of strength would literally be his strength versus infinity. Syndrome starts monologuing, and Jack teleports Syndrome's gadgets into the lava of the volcano. All his gadgets. And one of those gadgets is what made this whole place stable. So the island starts to self-destruct. So the Incredibles teleport home. But Syndrome, without his gadgets, has a front row seat for the eruption. Later, a funeral is held for Mr. Incredible, and an old friend comes to the funeral, Edna Mode. She tells the family she's sorry and that she assumed that they knew where he'd gone and why. Edna tells them there's no way that she can ever make up for that. But if they ever need her services, even though she's retired, just swing by day or night. Helen thanks Edna and hugs her. Which brings us to the epilogue, which takes place on Christmas of 1972. John Redbridge goes over to the Parr house, and Violet answers the door and kisses his cheek. She guides him to the living room, where Helen is using an old Super 8mm camera to record Jack opening his presents. Dash complains this is taking too long, and Helen tells him to shush, that she only has one little kid left, and she's going to enjoy the holidays like this for as long as she can. Dash rolls his eyes as John and Violet snuggle up next to each other on the couch by the crackling fireplace. When Jack's done, Dash opens his stuff at super speed, which annoys Helen. Violet teases John for walking in empty-handed, saying he's in trouble for not getting her anything. Then John gets out a ring box. Violet puts her hands over her mouth and everyone gets quiet, so John proposes the old-fashioned way, which feels weird for Helen, but at the same time, she knows John will never get old, and he will take care of Violet well into the 80s and 90s and beyond. Violet says yes, by the way, and they hug, and it's all recorded with the camera. Then Violet gives him a gift, and it's the sort of box you'd put a sweater in. So he opens it, and on the inside is one of the costumes Edna made. It's red with black trunks, just like everyone else's costume is. Violet tucks her hair behind her ear and says it's about time he had an actual super suit. And as soon as he has the costume in his hands, the music playing over the radio is interrupted by a news bulletin about some sort of giant snowman monster in the park. Authorities order everyone to stay at home. So, of course, the Incredibles suit up and head out. But that's a story for another day. We enjoyed this one. We hope you did too. If so, as always, smash that like button. Make sure you're subscribed. Ring the bell for notifications and leave us a comment. From all of us here at the longest running superhero role-playing game on Earth, we hope you have a good one, and we'll catch you in the next adventure. Bye.